Thaddeus and I have been engaged for 9 years. That day, he held her tightly at the rescue site, kissing her passionately. Serafina, don't worry, I will never abandon you for the rest of my life. I stood quietly in the pouring rain, knowing clearly that I would turn around and leave decisively. This time, I don't want to pretend I don't see it anymore. Let's break off the engagement, Thaddeus. The next morning, I placed the exchanged invitations and jade pendants from the engagement banquet on the table and calmly handed them to Thaddeus. His hand froze in the air, holding the coffee cup, stunned. Then he slowly put down the cup, leaned back on the sofa, squinted at me, and said, "Alara, are you joking?" I shook my head and said seriously, "I'm not joking. This is a well-considered decision," I added. Thaddeus turned his face away. The sky outside was dark and gloomy, as if it were about to rain. He nodded, stood up casually, and said, "It's up to you. I still have to go to work. The invitations are in the safe. You can get them yourself." I softly exclaimed and walked past him into the room, skillfully opening the safe. A dragon pendant was exchanged for a phoenix pendant, and one invitation was swapped for another. I held the jade pendant, gently touching the aged invitation, and slowly stood up. For 9 years, I had countless times wanted to end this relationship, yet I also felt regret countless times. This time, I absolutely won't. I took a deep breath and walked out of the room. From today on, I have no relationship with Thaddeus anymore. At the end of the corridor, I unexpectedly saw Thaddeus. He stood quietly at the entrance, as if waiting for me. I slowly walked over, intending to open the door and leave without acknowledging him. However, Thaddeus grabbed my hand and frowned, saying, "Alara, what happened yesterday was a misunderstanding." I stared at his long fingers without looking up. Misunderstanding? Yesterday, he had promised Serafina that they would be together forever. Last time, he had done everything he could to help Serafina stay with the rescue team. Previously, he defended Serafina and claimed she was his. Is all of this just a misunderstanding? I pushed his hand away and calmly opened the door. "It's okay. It's nothing now." This afternoon at the hospital, I ran into Serafina at the front desk. She was chatting happily with the head nurse, laughing brightly. As I walked by, she blocked me with her leg, her eyes filled with provocation. If it were before, I would have definitely listened to Thaddeus. I would have given in to her, apologized, and taken a detour. But now, I stepped on the top of her foot. Serafina clearly didn't expect me to do that. She felt a bit of pain and immediately pulled her foot back, angrily pushing me and shouting, "Alara, are you crazy? Do you know whose foot you stepped on?" I steadied myself, my face calm, knowing I stepped on the foot of Thaddeus's benefactor. 5 years ago, Thaddeus's grandmother had a stroke, and Serafina successfully rescued her in time. Grandma is very important to Thaddeus, so he is very grateful to Serafina. This gratitude has unconsciously turned into Thaddeus's unconditional obedience to her. Serafina's matters have become Thaddeus's top priority. Thaddeus stood me up for Serafina for the first time. It seems today is our 3-year engagement anniversary. Thaddeus's friend secretly told me that he plans to propose to me today. Thaddeus is a straight man. I don't want to start the second half of my life in such an unromantic setting. That day I spent a month's salary to book the best table at the Sunset Restaurant. I sat in the center of the romantic and beautiful restaurant, surrounded by flowers and applause, holding a fork to cut a delicate little cake. The ring sparkled in the sweet atmosphere, filling my heart with joy. But just then, Thaddeus received a call from Serafina. Without hesitation, he left me and went away. My smile instantly disappeared. That plea of "don't go" turned into "can you leave a little later?" When I met his cold gaze, he frowned, staring at the cake as if something occurred to him, but in the end, he coldly said to me, "Alara, stop it. Serafina is being harassed by someone at the bar." Perhaps a woman's intuition is always particularly sharp. That day, as I watched him walk away, I suddenly felt that Thaddeus wasn't mine. But even with such a premonition, it couldn't resist the repeated entanglements. Time and again, my heart fluttered. Time and again, I risked everything for love. How many times did Thaddeus stand me up for Serafina? It seems there were so many that I couldn't even remember them all. Serafina's voice was so loud that the entire floor could hear it. "Knowing you still dare," I snapped back to reality and calmly interrupted her. "What does this have to do with me?" In the past, Thaddeus not only protected her but also made me yield to her. My unconditional submission to her made Serafina even more arrogant. She has stolen my promotion opportunities, taken my patience, my mentor, and even my fiancé more than once. What she took in the past, I no longer want to pursue. I'm not planning to compromise any further. I have already broken off my engagement with Thaddeus. She looked at me blankly as if she didn't understand. Huh? What? From her eyes, I saw disbelief. That's true. Thaddeus comes from a wealthy family, is powerful, handsome, and serves as the captain of the rescue team with enormous potential for the future. How could anyone want to leave him? Maybe it's foolish. A man as excellent as him is worthless to me if he doesn't love me. I remained silent and calm, and Serafina noticed. She looked at me, smiling happily. Really? You two are no longer engaged? I wasn't affected by the excitement in her eyes. I stared at her and calmly said, yes, we broke off the engagement. Then you can be together openly. As soon as she finished speaking, Serafina quickly took off her white coat and threw it to the nurse beside her, then hurried away. I knew she was going to find Thaddeus. The nurse cautiously looked at me and asked, Dr. Alara, are you okay? I took a deep breath, forced a smile, and slowly said, I'm fine. After 4 surgeries, I touched my stomach, which was already growling with hunger, and slowly walked back to the office. In the office, a colleague at the next desk shared half a box of dumplings with me. I gratefully accepted them and thanked her. At that moment, I saw her scrolling through her phone, softly mumbling, Dr. Serafina is in love. She posted an official announcement on her social media. I was taken aback and quickly pulled out my phone to check Serafina's social media. The time was 1:14 p.m. She posted a photo of her and Thaddeus from behind on a carousel. The caption read, blue sky, white clouds, and the happy us under the carousel. I pursed my lips and suddenly lost my appetite for the dumplings. A photo of Thaddeus in a rescue suit, looking very handsome, was just sitting on my desk. I steeled myself, took the frame apart, stood up, and walked to the shredder to throw the photo in. The shredder slowly crushed the photo, making it completely disappear. I returned to my seat, opened the chopsticks, and devoured the dumplings. At 8 o'clock in the evening, I dragged my weary body back home. The phone rang with a familiar ringtone. I hesitated for half a minute before finally taking my phone out of my pocket. A wave of disappointment and grievance surged within me. Hey, Mom. I broke off the engagement with Thaddeus. After hearing this, Mom asked, oh dear, have you thought this through? You're already 33 years old. Who would marry you now if you break off the engagement? At this age, and considering this engagement was arranged by your grandma and Thaddeus's grandma, one has already passed away and the other can't remember, but we can't just go back on our promise. You must go find Thaddeus's grandma and explain it to her. If she agrees, I will support you. I hung up the phone and sat alone by the floor-to-ceiling window. The city was illuminated with lights, yet not a single one was left on for me. I feel like I will always feel lonely. At that moment, the phone rang again. I turned my head to take a look, swiped the screen, and said, hello, senior brother. The voice of my senior brother sounded in my ear. Are you going to the advanced training class in Germany? If I don't go, Serafina will take my place, so I'm going. Senior brother, I won't give her any more opportunities at the hospital. Senior brother started to nag, saying that I finally understood. I gave a bitter smile. It's not that I have come to terms with it, but I realized that what belongs to me shouldn't be easily given up. What doesn't belong to me doesn't need to be forced. The next day, I took a day off, but I was woken up early in the morning by the ringing phone. Thaddeus coldly said on the other end, what are you thinking? How could you mention breaking off the engagement to your family? Alara, you're already 33 years old. You're not a 23-year-old girl. Can you please think carefully before doing things? My groggy mind gradually became clear. Thaddeus, you like Serafina, don't you? There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. After a while, he seemed to have made a decision before speaking. Alara, not all affections have to end up together. Serafina and I are not what you think. You and I should be the ones getting married. I stared at the ceiling, suddenly feeling that this man I had loved for 10 years seemed to be struggling under the pressure. Thaddeus, the first time you stood me up for Serafina was on our engagement anniversary. That day you decided to marry me, but also chose to abandon me. The second time you disregarded my feelings for Serafina was when you shielded her from drinks at KTV. To help her win the competition, you kissed her and said it was just a game. The third time you put me aside was because you knew I had always wanted to be the director, and that as long as the attending physician participated in the rescue, I could be promoted, yet you still shamelessly gave Serafina the highest score. With each mention, my eyes reddened a little more. Thaddeus, you like her, you've wronged me. Do I need to keep saying it? The sound of a dial tone came from the phone. Thaddeus can't even say a single I am sorry. What a coward. He left. Chicago needs rescue, and Serafina decided to follow him. I don't want to pay attention to him, but Serafina keeps posting updates in our friend circle. Unable to bear it any longer, I chose to block her. The hospital, home, and gym have become the main places in my life. In the past, for Thaddeus, I had to squeeze out time to make rib soup for him and his team. After making it and packing it up, I rushed to the rescue team with dozens of boxes, only to receive a few light thank yous. The time saved now allows me to get a good night's sleep. No more worrying about dozing off in the operating room, drinking bitter black coffee that's hard to swallow, or napping on hard benches. A week later, Thaddeus returned. He was wearing a black plaid coat, standing tall with his hands in his pockets, blocking my way at the hospital entrance. Let's talk. Thaddeus took me to that Sunset restaurant we went to on our third engagement anniversary. The restaurant still had that central table, adorned with fresh flowers, surrounded by applause, and the sound of a cello playing, creating a tranquil and elegant atmosphere. He placed the sliced steak in front of me and slowly said in a hoarse voice, I thought about what you said that day. I can change. I will support you from now on. I cut the steak into small pieces and put them in my mouth, without responding. In the past, I couldn't tell who was a benefactor, who was a lover, the relationship between friends and fiancés. I will change, Alara. Can you give me a chance? I looked into his sincere eyes and at the 10-carat diamond ring in front of me, and slowly said, okay. Thaddeus's tense face relaxed in an instant. In the next moment, a familiar ringtone came from my pocket. Clearly, this was the ringtone he set for Serafina. Thaddeus cast a guilty glance at me. I lowered my head and continued eating the steak, pretending not to notice. In the past, when he answered Serafina's calls in front of me, he often showed this kind of guilty expression. I pretended to be generous and told him it was fine. Thaddeus shamelessly took advantage of my tolerance and continued to test the waters. This time, he was still like that. I'll take a call. Serafina knows I'm here to apologize today, so she won't disturb me. As he spoke, he answered Serafina's call. Serafina cried on the other end, Thaddeus, I've had an accident. I hit someone. He wants me to pay $100,000 to let me go, and there are many people around. I can see a hint of tension in Thaddeus's eyes. He immediately said on the phone, send me your location, I'll come right over. Serafina continued to cry on the other end, trembling as she agreed. Thaddeus hung up the phone, wanting to assure me that everything he just said was the truth and that he could do it. He said, Alara, don't worry, this is the last time I'll take care of her. From now on, I'll make it clear to her to call the police if she needs help, not me. I didn't look at him and finished the last piece of steak on my plate. In the hall, the violinist played the Waltz of Love, the sound romantic and elegant. Suddenly, fireworks burst in the night sky. The couples in the restaurant appeared particularly happy, but I am still alone. Whether it was 6 years ago or now, I have been left here in solitude. I thought to myself, I probably won't come to this restaurant again in my lifetime. I received a WeChat message on my phone. I opened it and saw Serafina's smug expression in the text. Look, such a cool guy is destined to be mine. In the video she sent, Thaddeus stood right in front of her, blocking the attacks from that troublesome old lady. In the afternoon, when I was leaving the office, Serafina told me that Thaddeus would apologize to you tonight, but don't worry, he will always support me, no matter what. Actually, when Thaddeus apologized to me just now, I was indeed a bit swayed. I was thinking that if he could really be with me tonight, I would give him another chance. It's a pity. It seems that heaven doesn't like him much, giving me a grand display of fireworks to celebrate his disappearance from my heart. Early the next morning, I rushed to Shanghai to apply for an overseas visa. After finishing the application, I took a visiting card and a jade pendant to visit Thaddeus's grandmother at the nursing home. This was already my several visits here. In the previous visits, Thaddeus's grandmother didn't recognize me and looked a bit confused. But this time she seemed much better and even called me Shashua Wanzi. I told her about the invitation and the reason for coming here. Grandma Thaddeus held the jade pendant in her hand and fell silent for a while. Then she looked up, her gaze seemingly seeing someone else beyond me. 20 years ago, when your grandmother passed away, she entrusted you to me, and I handed you over to my grandson. I had hoped that this expectation from our elders could be realized in you, but I didn't expect it to delay you for so many years. I'm truly sorry for you. It was Grandma and Thaddeus who made you suffer. With slightly moist eyes, she shook her head and said, Thaddeus made me understand what love is. I understand now that love cannot be forced. Choosing to let go now, I have no regrets. Grandma, this is my own decision. Grandma Thaddeus tore up the invitation, returned the jade pendant to me, and said, Grandma supports you. A month later, I successfully obtained the visa and boarded the flight to Germany. The jade pendant hung around my neck as a talisman. When the airplane door closed, I couldn't help but raise my phone to capture the sunset at that moment. I pointed the camera out the window but unexpectedly saw an incredible figure. Thaddeus. Not long after, the flight attendant informed us of a weather change and asked us to wait in the lounge. The passengers in the cabin looked at the blue sky, expressing their dissatisfaction and questioning why we couldn't fly in such good weather. Is there really no way? Did you misdiagnose? I was just about to reunite with my wife. What bad luck! I carried my backpack and walked towards Thaddeus under the guidance of the flight attendant. On his usually calm face, there was an unusual hint of tension as he suddenly opened his arms and hugged me tightly, slowly saying, Why didn't you tell me you were going to Germany for further studies? I pushed him away, turned my head to look at the puzzled passenger, and said in a very calm tone, You shouldn't have come. Thaddeus held my hand and placed a crescent-shaped jade pendant in my palm. I'm sorry, Ilara, forgive me. We will get married soon, okay? I looked at the jade pendant in my palm, and in front of me was Thaddeus, full of regret, but I felt nothing inside. Thaddeus, that day at the Sunset restaurant, I actually wanted to forgive you. But when you couldn't even say a word of apology and kept choosing to leave me, at that moment, my heart truly felt cold. We were together for 3 years, engaged for 9, and I gave you the best years of my youth. To be honest, the thought of letting go of this 12-year relationship to start a new life with someone else scares me. But suddenly one day, no matter how afraid I was of the future, no matter how much I told myself to keep loving you, I just couldn't do it anymore. At that moment, I knew I had truly let you go. I placed the jade pendant in his hand and then turned to leave. It was always me waiting for him, but this time, I was the one to walk away first. An hour later, I boarded the plane again. The tarmac outside the window was empty. The most remarkable person in the story ultimately disappeared into the crowd. The first-class passengers looked at me with strange expressions and then whispered among themselves. These wealthy and powerful people hijacked a plane for love, while we bystanders became mere supporting characters. It's truly helpless. I closed my eyes and ignored them. 12 hours later, I was walking the streets of Munich, breathing in the fresh air, feeling a wave of freedom wash over me. The suitcase suddenly bumped into a gentleman, scattering things everywhere. I apologized and decided to treat him to a meal. In the restaurant, he wore a black satin shirt and carried himself very elegantly. Before leaving, he handed me a business card. A psychology professor in Munich, Lucian. The days studying in Germany were busy. I was learning German while keeping up with my courses. I was so busy that I didn't think about Thaddeus even once. The next time I saw him was on Thanksgiving Day. Because of the pandemic back home, I chose to spend the new year in Germany. When my mom called, Thaddeus appeared on the video. My mom said that Thaddeus mentioned he wanted to come see you. I greeted him on the screen but didn't say anything. Thaddeus looked at me for several seconds and slowly asked, How have you been lately? I was silent for 2 seconds, reflecting on the events of the past year, and smiled while nodding. Very good. After hanging up, I put the New Year's goods I just bought at the supermarket into the fridge. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. Lucian came in with bags, some snow from outside on his shoulder. He exhaled a puff of warm air and smiled, saying, I knew you weren't going back home, so celebrating the new year together is pretty good, right? I stepped aside to let him in. He walked straight into the kitchen, started unpacking, and poured himself some water. During this year of study in Germany, if there was any surprise, Lucian would be one of them. After we parted at the airport that day, I ran into him again at school. Coincidentally, he lived very close to my house. We often made plans to eat together. On the way home, he taught me German while I treated him to dinner. As time went by, we gradually became familiar with each other. Lucian expressed his feelings to me. That little restaurant was completely different from Sunset Restaurant. The atmosphere was much more relaxed. The singer was singing romantic German love songs, and the waiter came over with balloons and a cake. Lucian knelt on one knee, holding a necklace, while warm blessings filled the air. Love is so passionate and obvious. That question, would you be my partner for a lifetime? It moved me to tears. I took the balloons and ate the cake, but I didn't accept the necklace. Lucian felt confused and persistently asked me for over a month. I calmly recounted my 12 years with Thaddeus to him. In the end, I said, you have been teaching in Munich for many years, while I will return to my country next year. Neither of us would give up our lives. There's no need to continue pursuing something without a result. Let's just be friends. Lucian seemed to understand, didn't press further, and simply mentioned, it's too lonely to eat alone, so he could come to my house to cook more often. On the day I returned home, I unexpectedly ran into Lucian on the plane. He smiled slightly, raised his hands like pieces of art, and said, perhaps living in a different city would feel different? The string in my heart, which had been still for a long time, began to ripple. What surprised me even more was that I saw Thaddeus waiting for me at the tarmac. He walked over just like 2 years ago, gently wanting to tuck my hair behind my ear. But this time, his hand was stopped by another hand. Lucian stood in front of me, flashing his charming 8 white teeth, and said domineeringly, you have quite the authority, picking up my girlfriend on the tarmac? Thaddeus's face darkened, seemingly unable to believe this fact, and he gritted his teeth, asking me, Alara, is what he said true? As he waited for my answer, his fist was tightly clenched. I walked up to Lucian and firmly replied with a yes. Thaddeus's eyes turned red, and without saying a word, he turned and walked away. I watched his back, marveling at how time is truly wonderful. He disappeared right in front of me, and I felt nothing at all. A warm breath was felt near my neck. Lucian's voice was clear with a hint of amusement, mixed with some complaints, expressing various complex emotions, for the first time asking for a title, and I have to rely on my ex. He's so good-looking. Don't you want to keep looking at him and not leave? I hit him in annoyance. I was just expressing my feelings. The next day, I stood at the hospital entrance. The sun was shining brightly, and the sky was a clear blue. The dean and the leaders were waiting for me at the door. After chatting for a while, I returned to my familiar office. From a distance, the place that used to hold Thaddeus's photo frame now displayed a bouquet of blue roses. The card had flowing, vigorous handwriting that read, "Happy promotion, waiting for you to dinner tonight." The colleagues nearby seemed a bit curious, displaying a gossipy expression. Wow, new developments right after coming back home? I smiled slightly and put the card in the drawer. We met abroad. A colleague covered their mouth and exaggeratedly said, you actually came back home with them? I nodded. Just as my colleague was about to ask more questions, the head nurse came in holding a bouquet of white roses. Dr. Alara, these flowers are from Thaddeus's team. I frowned, thinking about refusing to accept the flowers. Unexpectedly, the head nurse grabbed my hand and said mysteriously, Serafina had an accident during surgery last week and was dismissed. Thaddeus didn't help her. I pushed her hand away, glanced at the white rose, but didn't take it. Put it at the front desk to help the patients change their mood. Once the nurse left, the lively gossip atmosphere vanished. So I opened my computer and started working seriously. After work, I left the office with my bag. Thaddeus was playing with the bouquet of white roses in front of the nurse's station. As I passed by, he stopped me and gently said, let's celebrate your promotion with a meal? I shook my head and refused, saying, no, my boyfriend will take me. Thaddeus seemed not to understand, holding my hand tightly and not letting go. Alara, I've cut ties with Serafina. I've been reflecting and regretting during this time. Can you give me another chance? I pushed his hand away and impatiently said, I no longer like you. Please stop bothering me. This remark clearly affected Thaddeus. He asked in shock, Alara, Do you think I'm bothering you? I looked him in the eye and answered firmly, yes, you're the one who's entangled with me. Thaddeus, over the past 2 years, I've often thought of you and the 12 years we spent together. I frequently ask myself how I managed to endure while we were in a 3-year relationship and 9 years together, yet you were so ambiguous with Serafina for so long. Until one day, I finally understood. You come from a privileged background and have a proud personality, but after making mistakes, you were willing to bow down and apologize to me. Your special attention made me feel very at ease, but your favoritism towards me was actually for her. As I said this, Thaddeus's expression began to show some unease. I bluntly exposed his thoughts. The person you favor in your heart is not me, but Serafina. You can't admit that you've fallen for an ordinary person who lacks education and ability, but only has beauty and comes from a poor background. You're afraid of being criticized by others for being heartless, and you don't want to admit you've changed your mind about love. Thaddeus, you're only thinking of yourself, letting 2 women waste their youth and energy on you. It's truly selfish. Let me guess. You didn't vouch for Serafina because you were afraid that I would make things difficult for her when I return as the director, right? Thaddeus's expression turned quite grim. In the end, I said, it's not me who likes white roses, but Serafina. Without looking back, I turned and left. At the hospital entrance, Lucian stood out in a white coat, leaning against a pillar. I walked over, took his arm, tried to shake off the bad mood, and smiled, saying, let's go. Once in the car, he helped me fasten my seatbelt, handed me my phone, and then returned to the driver's seat. I'm not very familiar with the local area, but here are a few restaurants I found. You can see which one you want. Lucian and I have similar tastes, and the restaurants he takes me to are always reliable. He selected 5 restaurants on the screen, and without looking at the others, I pointed to the top-ranked Sunset restaurant and said, how about this one? I've been there many times, and the food is good. In the restaurant, I casually ordered a few dishes that I thought were delicious before, and smiled at Lucian, saying, these are all very tasty. For my first meal back home, I hope you find a good job. The environment here is equally luxurious, the atmosphere is great, and there's a violin performance. I once thought I never wanted to go back to that restaurant, but after 2 years, I came again and felt completely different. This time, I didn't feel so lonely. Lucian raised his glass to toast with me. The night was enchanting, and the chandelier illuminated his finely featured face, making him particularly attractive. We agreed to celebrate today, my treat. Alara, my parents are coming to New York next week. Would you like to meet them with me? I smiled and agreed, sure. After talking with Thaddeus that day, I blocked all his contact information. But by the weekend, he still called me from an unknown number. His grandmother is sick and keeps mentioning you. She hopes you can come see her. I felt a bit reluctant in my heart, but I didn't agree, just giving vague responses. After hanging up, I immediately called a taxi to go to the nursing home. Thaddeus's grandmother was indeed quite ill. After all, she was old and had completely forgotten who I was. I took off the jade pendant around my neck, placed it in her hand, and softly said, Grandma, it's me, little Snowball. I've come to visit you. Although Grandma Thaddeus is a bit confused, she still recognized the jade pendant. She mistook me for her good friend, who is my grandmother, and chatted away incessantly. When Thaddeus saw me come in, his eyes showed clear happiness. I stayed with Grandma Thaddeus until evening, just as I managed to lull her to sleep. Lucian messaged me saying he was here to pick me up. I got up, ignored Thaddeus, and walked out the door. To my surprise, he stopped me at the door and handed me the jade pendant I had dropped. It was then that I remembered the jade pendant around my neck was used to soothe Grandma Thaddeus and had fallen into her hands. I took the pendant and softly said thank you. Thaddeus took a step forward, a hint of pain in his eyes. You still keep the phoenix pendant from our engagement. Why won't you just forgive me? At that moment, my phone showed that Lucian had arrived, and I felt a bit annoyed. Thaddeus, continuing to entangle yourself like this is pointless. I thought that after saying this, Thaddeus would understand and leave. I didn't expect him to get closer, his eyes filled with anger as he stared at me. I can't believe it. If you really forgot me, why do you still have the jade pendant? You're just trying to anger me, right? I slapped him without hesitation and pushed him away. Thaddeus's eyes flashed with complex emotions, hurt, confusion, unease, and a hint of regret. Although I saw it all, I still clearly stated that I kept the jade pendant for Thaddeus's grandmother. It has nothing to do with you. I'll say it again, Thaddeus. We're done. We've been separated for a long time. It ended 2 years ago. Do you understand? Thaddeus's expression suddenly changed, but he didn't look at me. He suddenly lunged at me, shouting, "Watch out!" I instinctively turned my head back, my eyes wide open. An old man rushed out from the next room, holding a knife. There was no time to react. I instinctively closed my eyes. Suddenly, I was hugged and spun around, the familiar scent of grass and wood filling my nose. When I opened my eyes, I saw Thaddeus's arms covered in blood. The nurse at the nursing home seized the opportunity to control the old man and hurriedly called for an ambulance. I was at a loss for words and felt very frustrated inside. I wanted to say something, but I couldn't express it. What exactly is Thaddeus doing? In the hospital, I stood at his bedside, my expression very cold. He lay there, his lips pale, and smiled faintly, saying, "Don't be angry, I just wanted to protect you." I was filled with anger and said irritably, "Thaddeus, thank you for saving me. I will cover all the medical expenses and will hire a caregiver for you." He was silent for a moment, touching his injured arm, looking at me pitifully. "Can you take care of me?" I shook my head in refusal and walked out of the ward. Lucian stood at the door, playing with the cufflinks in his hand. When he saw me come out, he teased, "I thought you would show him some compassion and agree." I did not respond and walked coldly ahead. "You rushed from the nursing home to the hospital door, but I didn't see you this anxious." Lucian caught up with me and took out a piece of chocolate from his pocket, handing it to me. "I have always respected your matters. Your thoughts are your own, and my actions are mine. If you really agree to him today, I will respect your choice." I asked with some dissatisfaction, "What if he pretends to be pitiful and tries to pull me back?" Lucian smiled confidently, saying you wouldn't do that. I was surprised and turned to look at him from the passenger seat. Lucian's fingers were distinct as he held the steering wheel and elegantly made a turn. "If your attitude weren't so firm, I would have pursued you back in Germany. Why should I chase you all over to bring you back home?" I smiled, and my mood suddenly brightened. Thaddeus saved me, and that is a favor. In this relationship, he has always been indecisive, which is really annoying. I used to harbor resentment towards him, but he saved my life, so I guess that evens things out. Lucian's hand that wasn't on the steering wheel gently touched my fingertips, as if he were sensing something. "Don't forget, you need to meet my family this weekend." I nodded happily. On Saturday morning, I chose a simple white Chinese qipao to wear out. Just then, the caregiver called with an anxious tone, "Miss Alara, Mr. Thaddeus has a fever and can't eat anything. We can't persuade him." I frowned and after 2 seconds of silence, I said, "Go find a doctor. The doctor won't let anything happen to him in the hospital." At that moment, Lucian couldn't help but laugh. I shot him a glare and then hung up the phone. The white Audi SUV drove towards a low-key yet luxurious mansion. I stared at the villa in front of me, which looked like a palace, and was stunned for 2 seconds. "Why have you never told me your family is so wealthy?" Lucian seemed a bit taken aback and smiled. "I forgot. I'm really sorry." Walking into the villa with a nervous heart, scenes of rich ladies spending extravagantly from TV dramas flashed through my mind. But when I saw Lucian's mother, I suddenly felt much more relaxed. His mother was very low-key and started chatting with me after we met. On her wrist, she quietly wore a fine warm jade bracelet. "These are all the things we have at home. You can take them for now, and Auntie will prepare better ones for the engagement day." This meal made me very happy. The only small regret is that I received a call from the caregiver while in the restroom. Thaddeus asked me to come find him one last time. I was worried he would pull another stunt, so I had no choice but to agree. After the meal, I asked Lucian to take me to the hospital. Before getting out of the car, he grabbed my hand and pulled me into his arms. Lucian held me and kissed me for quite a while, only letting go when my lips were chapped. "Don't agree to anything he says, agree to me instead." I sensed the unease in his tone, so I kissed his lips once. "It won't happen," I said. In the hospital, I sat next to Thaddeus, quietly waiting for him to speak. He didn't say anything, just silently watched me cry. I didn't disturb him, just waited for him to finish crying. Thaddeus seemed to be tired of crying. With red eyes he asked me, "Do we really have no hope?" "I regret it, Alara, I really regret it." During this time, I've thought a lot, actually. the person I've always loved is you. Serafina was just an impulse. I interrupted him and coldly said, I don't want to hear this nonsense anymore. I currently have a boyfriend, and our relationship is great. We're about to get married. You said this would be our last meeting, that's why I came. If there's something you want to say, just say it directly. Let's forget the rest. The phrase forget-itis particularly hurtful. Thaddeus looked at me, appearing somewhat impatient, his eyes gradually turning red. His voice choked with emotion. He said, I can't believe you still have our jade pendant. I sighed, took the jade pendant off my neck, and stared at it for a long time. The expectation in Thaddeus's eyes was quite evident. In the end, I took a deep breath and forcefully threw the jade pendant on the ground. It shattered into pieces. Thaddeus angrily asked, Are you crazy? I calmly said, If this jade pendant gives you any hope of salvaging our relationship, then I'd rather break it. Thaddeus, I'm very grateful that you saved me in the sanatorium. However, I hope you won't disturb me again. You wasted 12 years of my life. It's time to let me go. I stood up and walked out of the hospital room. Thaddeus shouted from behind, Elara, you are mine. Why should I let you go? Come back to me. I didn't look back. I just closed the door and left. Standing outside the hospital room was someone who surprised me, Serafina. We sat in a cafe across from the hospital. She looked very haggard, as if she had aged 10 years in an instant. Our eyes met, and she lowered her head, holding the coffee cup, and said self-deprecatingly, It's really funny, isn't it? I was the third party for 6 years, following Thaddeus, and in the end, I had nothing. Elara, do you think I deserve this? I remained silent, gazing out the window. Outside the window, a couple was walking their dog, teasing it. I smiled and asked, Do you think if they break up, they will still keep the dog? Serafina's expression changed, as if she misunderstood my meaning. I didn't explain, just took a sip of coffee and asked, How have you been lately? Her expression was still bad, and she forced out a response, not so good. In fact, it could be said to be very poor. Before, Thaddeus was always by my side, and I felt it was okay if my skills as a doctor weren't great, as long as I didn't have to go into the operating room. But after he stopped protecting me, I realized I didn't even have the qualifications for outpatient care. The couple at the door has already left. Only Lucian's car remains parked outside the cafe. I finished my coffee and said directly, Serafina, I understand you, being young and from a poor family, attracted to mature and charming men. However, you still chose to be a mistress, which shows that your desire outweighs your morals. This kind of desire today has led you to 6 years of disgraceful days, and in the future, this desire may ruin you. If you can wake up a little, just live well in the future. Serafina stared at me, her eyes red. I stood up and left the cafe, opening Lucian's car door. Who says you can't meet someone better after leaving Thaddeus? It's never too late to start in life. 3 months later, I heard that Thaddeus was dismissed from his position. The reason was that Serafina compiled her chat records with Thaddeus into a PPT and sent it to the disciplinary committee's email. The higher-ups were very angry. Handling violations by leaders is always a big deal. The possibility of Thaddeus being reinstated seems slim. As for Serafina's whereabouts, I'm not quite sure. I heard she seems to have returned to her hometown, where her family arranged a blind date for her. She is divorced and has a child. However, the man has good financial conditions. Serafina agreed and sent wedding candies to the familiar head nurse. I haven't paid much attention to what happened afterward. I'm getting married. At the Sunset restaurant, everyone was present. Lucian knelt on one knee, holding a 10-carat diamond ring, and asked me, Elara, will you marry me? I was in tears and nodded in agreement. I do. On the wedding day, my mom was very happy, wiping her tears while laughing and saying, It's not easy, a 35-year-old girl finally got married. I patted her shoulder with a hint of displeasure and sighed, saying she really doesn't say nice things. Dad quietly stepped back and quietly slipped out of the room, while Lucian sensibly followed him out. My mom and I joked with each other and cheerfully finished doing the bride's makeup. At the wedding, Lucian read the letters he wrote to each other. Elara, I am your future husband, Lucian. The first time I saw you was at Munich airport, and I instantly liked you. I really appreciate that your luggage bumped into me that day, which led you to treat me to a meal. Actually, I'm not a proactive person. Even if I have feelings, it's hard for me to speak up. That day, I thought you had just arrived in Munich and might need a gentleman to help you understand the local customs. For that reason, I left my business card, hoping you would take the initiative to contact me. But you didn't. I waited by the phone for a long time and never received your call. Just when I had completely lost hope, I ran into you in the school auditorium. This time, I took the initiative. I moved near your house to confess my feelings and to gradually get closer to you as we return to our home country together. My love is simple. I've decided it's you, and I'm willing to spend the rest of my life with you. I love you, Ilara. Tears welled up in my eyes as I kissed Lucian's lips. At this moment, my long-awaited happiness has finally arrived.